Mailbag is open. You can always hit us up at the Phillies Mailbag. Frank Klose from 97.3 ESPN.com, SportsTalkPhilly.com. I think the Phillies, we talked yesterday. I wanted to ask Frank about this, by the way, see if he agrees. I think the Phillies are a team that is just like anonymously running in the background, like no criticism. Nobody's praising them. Nobody's like paying attention to anything that the Phillies are doing, Frank. It seems that Matt Klentak has got like the perfect situation in Philly. Nobody knows what's going on with that team. They're just kind of hanging around. At what point do people start to look at the Phillies and expect something?
That's a really good question. I think the Phillies fans that are kind of tuned into the club, they do understand that they are in a rebuild, and I think they see promise with the rebuild, which is why I think you don't see anybody too upset. I mean, the Phillies fans aren't necessarily heading down to the ballpark in droves last season. You know, this year I think the young guys, as they come up, I think that will create some excitement. But I think because the Phillies fans are pretty smart. You know, I think they would know if the management of the Phillies were lying to them, or if they didn't really believe that this was an earnest rebuild, they might be more annoyed. But I mean, let's face it, Philadelphia is kind of used to the rebuilding, you know, with the Sixers and to a lesser extent the Eagles. You know, they did some minor rebuilding as they went over to Doug Peterson, but really I think fans kind of get what's going on, and I think they know that there are young players coming down the pike, and as we see from our questions time to time, I think some fans are a little too eager. They want them right away. But I think they actually trust that what's going on is going to be productive.
Before we get to the mailbag questions, let's go over some of the news today, Frank. Chris Coughlin released. He appeared like he had the leg up for that final bench spot, or one of the bench spots. So a little bit of a surprise, this move?
Yeah, I'm not totally surprised. I mean, I tended to think that if you were comparing him and Daniel Nava, you know, if you look at what Pete Mackanin has had to say along the way, he really seemed to offer a lot of praise of Nava, and Coughlin didn't really get a lot of attention. I don't know why that is. I mean, I think somebody like Coughlin is going to be a very helpful piece to a major league team. I would not be surprised at all if somebody grabs Coughlin and put them on their opening day roster. That still could happen. But I think the switch hitting Nava had a leg up because he was switch hitting. And there's still another spot available, but I don't see the Phillies cutting two players to try to make this happen. It's possible that the Phillies make a trade or something, but the fact that to add too many of these non-roster veterans is going to cost you in the form of prospects, because you have to release them or cut them or trade them or do something. I think the Phillies wanted to give Coughlin the courtesy of a little bit of time to find a team towards the end, but he's good enough for somebody, but in this situation, I don't think he was the best fit.
Frank, do you see any 40-man roster moves coming?
Something's got to happen. I've always said all along, and not every Phillies mind agrees with me. I think Luis Garcia is the one that's going to go. Phillies have plenty of right-handed relief help that's younger and perhaps more veteran on either end, and Garcia is a 30-year-old who had a 6 ERA in the spring. I just think he's the one that might actually be somebody they can hold on to by shuffling him through waivers, and they could keep him in the system. So I think Garcia is the one to go, although I was looking around. Some beat writers think that Garcia is going to make the Phillies. But I think he's if you look at that 40-man roster and you go down the list, you have a lot of prospects. You know, you're not going to cut Zach Eflin. You're not going to cut Jake Thompson. So, and you look at the outfield, you have the likes of Nick Williams. You're not Dylan Cousins. You're not going to cut any of those guys. So I think Garcia's it, and I think there's a chance that he's the only one.
Talk with Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. We have the Phillies mailbag for you every Tuesday at Frank Klose with a K, or at SportsTalkPhilly.com for more on the Phillies. Let's get into the mailbag. A lot of questions this week. Start with Betsy's question. She wants to know, why are the Phillies willing to lose? This is a fun question. Why are the Phillies, willing to lose with guys on the decline when they could lose with young guys and the learning curve who will improve?
Yeah, I think Betsy – well, let me tell you where Betsy's coming from. A lot of Phillies fans might know her on Twitter as Baseball Betsy, and she lives down in Florida, and she spends a lot of time tracking the Phillies young players. So she's somebody who's got a particular interest in seeing some of these young guys come up. So her question also is kind of common. When you look at the types of players the Phillies acquired in the offseason, they added Howie Kendrick, they added Michael Saunders to the outfield, and that means somebody like Roman Quinn or Aaron Altair or Nick Williams or Dylan Cousins, none of those guys are going to get a starting job this year. But I think when you look at what the Phillies are doing, they really, really want their prospects to earn their jobs. And for Roman Quinn, the thing that we kept talking about with him all last year was, can this guy stay healthy? And I think he sort of needs to demonstrate that he's going to be healthy and he can put together a full season, or at least give the appearance he can get through a full season before the Phillies bring him up. And when somebody like Nick Williams, last year, he sort of peaked in the minor leagues, sitting around 290 in July, and then he sort of fell off. Nick Williams spoke about how he was probably pressing a little bit too much early last season when he looked at the Phillies outfield and saw, people like Cedric Hunter and David Lowe and Manny Burris getting outfield starts. He really tried a little too hard. So I think they want somebody like Nick Williams to naturally rise through the system. They want to see him hitting over 300, playing really, really good defense like he can do, and basically make a statement at the minor leagues that it's time for him to come up. So what they don't want is that gaping hole in the outfield that they had last year, where David Lowe, Manny Burris, are your 7-8 hitters, and you have a pitcher behind it. They really want the major league product to be a little bit more shored up, and really the young players, I think, there are some that you could say were squeezed, but let's take the pitching for example. You might think, all right, well, Jake Thompson and Zach Eflin, they could have been in the major leagues to start the season. Well, maybe, but we already saw with both those pitchers, they've been battling injuries. Now, Eflin has not yet made a Grapefruit League appearance. Now, Thompson finally got one in and is going to have another. But Eflin pitched a minor league game yesterday, so he's still not 100%. And if you remember how Aaron Nola's season ended, you have a little worry about his elbow. So if the Phillies didn't pick up a couple veteran starters like Clay Buchholz, for example, and hanging on to Jeremy Hellickson, they could find themselves in a situation where they have nobody to throw the ball. And I really don't think they want to rush any of their young players beyond those we named. I think they would love to see Ben Lively and Nick Pivetta get some AAA time. Mark Appel really needs to get in there, show he's healthy. If you rush one of those guys, you're not really doing the Phillies a service. So I understand why they would bring in some veterans, which I assume she's referring to as the guys on decline. But they really need that stability. They need to have that depth, and they really want the players to truly earn their promotion and not sort of be giving it ahead of schedule.
Frank Klose is with us. The Phillies mailbag is open, and Frank George is asking about Howie Kendrick's salary. Does Howie Kendrick's salary prevent his release so they can open a spot later on this season for, say, a Quinn or a Nick Williams?
Yeah, actually, this question worked out well with the previous question. Now, I think Kendrick is not somebody who impressed George this spring. Now, if you look at the numbers, Kendrick's batting .212, which is low for him, but George is kind of asking a bigger question: are the salaries that the Phillies have committed to the players in 2017 going to sort of preclude them from making proper roster decisions? And when you look at the Phillies and the money they spent, they really had no money committed into this season. Brian Howard's finally off the books, and certainly Chooch has moved on. So in terms of veteran players earning a veteran salary, they didn't really have any. They brought Hellickson back for $17 million. They took on the $13 million that Buchholz is due. Michael Saunders, $9 million. Kendrick, they just basically took on his $10 million salary and didn't really give up anything to get him. So really, they were in a situation where they could just shell out a bunch of money, get some veteran pieces. They didn't even have to worry about the costs. What was nice about it was, if you sign a free agent, you often end up committing to multiple years. But they acquired veterans in trade, or in Hellickson's case, got the qualifying offer where there's no commitment beyond this year. And if you add them all up, you can say, well, that's $49 million. That's the amount of money you could spend on an ace pitcher. That's at, plus you could add a stud closer. But those types of players aren't the players the Phillies really need right now. I think that the players like Kendrick were picked up because this is their last year. They can get them for little cost in terms of prospects. And you know what? If it comes down to it down the line, if somebody is really, really struggling and you get to July, the Phillies are in a position where they could just eat the money. Money is not really a worry for the Phillies this year. And that's not to say they should have gone out and signed a big-name free agent. I mean, really, this free agent class didn't have a lot of them. So they didn't miss out on anybody. And right now, I don't think that they're going to let somebody's salary get in the way of an important player from moving up. So if Nick Williams is ready to go for sure, and maybe it's July and they can't trade anybody, yeah, maybe they actually just bite the bullet and eat the money. So I think that's really not a worry right now. And I also, as a side point, I want to say I don't think Kendrick's 212 average is worth worrying about right now. I mean, look at Maikel Franco. He's only hitting 5 points higher than Kendrick so far this spring. So spring numbers don't always translate to the season. And veterans like that, they're often just getting their skin getting warm. And somebody like Kendrick has always been a professional hitter. And I think he'll do a decent job batting second for the Phillies because even if he's not getting hits, he's somebody who can move a runner if Cesar Hernandez gets on base to lead off the game. And the next thing you know, you have Hernandez at second and somebody like Adubel Herrera can single him home. So I think Kendrick could still be helpful to the Phillies. But no, money is not going to have the Phillies block anybody or inhibit any progress that the team could make.
Hey, real quick, Jesmiel Valentin, a guy that maybe not a lot of people have ever heard about. What do you know about him? And does he have a shot to make this team? Because he seems like a guy that nobody would have predicted would make this team when camp started.
Yeah, well, you look at our final question. Rich is saying, are the Phillies going to be stuck keeping Valentin or Roman Quinn? And it was kind of an interesting question because, when you looked at the invite that Valentin got, I mean, the Phillies really liked Valentin, and they really felt that he was somebody that could be a useful major league player for them. And right now the Phillies are in their final round of cuts. Roman Quinn's gone. Tyler Goeddel, also a member of the 40-man roster, was gone. And I think what Rich was basically getting down to was, are they going to be stuck carrying a player just because they're on the 40-man roster? Well, it might be that Valentin actually earns his spot. If you look at how he's been doing this spring, he's been batting .378, and he has an OPS of .980. I mean, meaning he's been walking a lot. And to have somebody with a good glove who's a switch hitter really gives the Phillies a lot of options. Now, last year, of course, the Phillies were using 2 roster spots for first base. And having an extra player this year is going to really help them out, because they weren't going to cut Howard, and Tommy Joseph certainly earned his playing time. So instead of having somebody who's only a first baseman, you could have somebody that can play shortstop, can play second base, could be a pinch hitter from either side of the plate. And, somebody like Andres Blanco, who's kind of in that backup utility infielder role, often the backup utility infielder doesn't really get a lot of pinch hitting time because, you want to save somebody who can play up the middle in case of an injury or something. So this is not to say you won't use the player if you have to, but, I think they would probably prefer to have Andres Blanco pinch hit now and then over Valentin, which means that Valentin could be somebody who is that last bat off the bench who can play up the middle and serve as that backup infielder. So he's on the 40-man roster, and that certainly is going for him right now. The Phillies are basically down to Valentin, Daniel Nava, and Brock Stassi for just those last 2 spots. And I suppose it's possible they could clear two spots on the 40-man roster, but like I said, my assessment of the 40-man roster, I don't see anybody other than Luis Garcia being cut. There's just too many good prospects on that 40-man roster that you do not want to lose. So now, as I mentioned before, I mean, there could be a last-minute trade. I would rather see the Phillies trade Tyler Goeddel and get something back of value, perhaps not on the 40-man roster. and match up with a team that actually could use Goodell's tools, since the Phillies are so loaded with outfielders that Goodell's going all the way to Double-A. I think Valentin does have a real shot, and this is one that's going to go down to the wire, because I think the Phillies, as we saw with their catching decision, they released both veteran catchers so that Andrew Knapp could be the backup catcher, and Knapp being a member of the 40-man roster. So that's motivated them there before. I really don't think they want to cut many if they don't have to. So that could work in Valentin's favor. And you know what? Something else that might be a consideration. We've talked before together about that Scott Kingery, who had a nice little impressive showing early in spring training. Maybe the Phillies decide that they want Scott Kingery to be a Triple-A and not Double-A, and therefore second base would be wide open for him at Triple-A if that's what they were thinking too. So there's a lot of things kind of working here where it could work out that Valentin makes the Phillies.
All right, interesting stuff as the Phillies in their final week before the start of the regular season. Well, they'll take on the Cincinnati Reds, and we'll have a full preview of the Phillies on Friday. And, of course, our NL East previews continue all week. Today, we're taking a look at the Mets tonight at 5:30. Frank Klose has more on the Phillies, plenty more on the Phillies, at 97.3 ESPN.com. You can also check out Frank on Twitter at Frank Klose with a K, or check him out at SportsTalkPhilly.com during the week. Frank, we will catch up soon, pal. Thanks.
Sounds good. Have a good one, guys.